Hello and welcome to the ICA's Diversity and Inclusion Series, Celebration of People, where we spotlight the compliance industry's leading diversity champions, making a difference in the industry and society at large. Today, I'm joined by Julia from HSBC. Julia, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Shannon. It's great to be here. Thank you.
So the purpose of our discussion today focuses on how we actually start a conversation about diversity and inclusion in the compliance world in which we both operate. So for me, the first question that I have is just to hear your thoughts on what some of the barriers are that you think, what some of the barriers we have when it comes to starting that conversation. So what's the first hurdle or the biggest hurdle that you think we have to jump over to get that conversation going?
The first thing that comes into my mind is fear.
Okay.
And, a fear of getting involved in a conversation that you're not 100% sure about how it might go, rules of that conversation might be, worried about saying the wrong thing and, it not being received well, maybe not knowing the terminology to use. What's the right terminology when you're talking about a particular sphere of diversity and inclusion?
Yeah.
And sometimes the fact that it's a big issue, isn't it? There's lots of different elements of diversity and inclusion. And if you try and tackle it all in one go, it's just too much.
Yeah.
So, it would be around try and break it down into smaller chunks. It doesn't have to be a big station about everything.
No.
Just, focus on particular parts and hopefully you can overcome that fear and get into a really, really good conversation.
Yeah, so that's, that kind of chimes with what we're hearing from some other people in the industry as well. So I guess you've mentioned there breaking it down into smaller chunks and sort of managing it piece by piece instead of trying to take what this huge umbrella term that we call diversity and inclusion inequality. So if we break that down and look at those specific components that make that up, what other ways do you think there is to overcome those barriers? What other ways can we make starting this conversation easier, dare I say?
Yeah, I think really trying to negate that fear. A lot of that fear is around lack of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So I think educating people,
Yeah.
and not, a big education program, just small chunks, small pieces of information, just so people feel more comfortable with that conversation. And as I said before, it doesn't need to be a big conversation or a big forum. Actually a small group is really good, where you can actually have a conversation rather than like a big Q&A session. So I think that's a really good way to start that conversation. And for me, one thing that's really about overcoming those barriers, if you can find people who are prepared to share their story on a particular aspect of diversity inclusion, those stories are really powerful and really bring it to life in terms of something that somebody's experienced themselves, and then for you to be able to try and relate to that, or sometimes not be able to relate to it, but actually hear the experience that they've had.
Yeah. No, and I think again we've heard this before, sort of sometimes hearing stories from people that most likely in a professional space you work with every day, sometimes to hear from those people instead of seeing it on the news or reading about it on social media, sometimes that can help just in approaching the subject, if nothing else. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear. I guess on that approaching piece, I know you're working quite a lot internally as an organisation on diversity and inclusion. How do you approach that in a professional space without it becoming too personal or without crossing any boundaries?
Yeah, I mean, it goes a little bit back to some of the things I've already said. I think a small conversation with a trusted group is a good way. So people that maybe already, and that you're in a safe space. I think making it clear that it is a safe space.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you come out with the wrong phrase or phrase it in the wrong way, not going to get into any sort of trouble. People will take it in a way that people are trying to learn. So they'll take it in a positive way, and you call it out that actually that's not right, or you shouldn't have said that, but actually this is what we should be using, these are the terms we should be using. So it's done in a positive way rather than in a fearful way.
Rather than
I think that's really good.
So rather as a sort of like a punishment and a sort of confrontational way to sort of approach that as this is a safe learning environment, this is a safe space, which is ultimately what we're trying to do here at the ICA with this series, is create a safe conversation for people to think about this kind of thing within our world, and how diversity brings so much to our profession, but how we can talk about that without fear of saying the wrong thing, as we've mentioned a few times already, upsetting somebody or not in the right terminology. So that safe space is it's fascinating when you watch that play out in a professional environment. I guess it would be interesting to know what your biggest piece of advice would be for anyone out there who's looking to get involved in this kind of thing in their professional world, in their business, or in the community in general. I don't know how much exposure you have to it, but just as a general thought, how would you sort of recommend people get involved? How can people get involved in this in their workspace?
Yeah, I've been on the diversity and inclusion agenda at HSBC for quite some time. I've been with the bank quite a long time, but I don't 20 years or more probably when I think about it. And I think during that time, the conversation has swung into different areas of diversity and inclusion, with emphasis being in different places. I think my biggest piece of advice would be, you've just got to be brave.
Yeah.
It can make you feel uncomfortable. And quite often the thought of it is actually worse than that. When you get into the conversation, it's absolutely fine. Just think about it as the aim is learning. And when you're learning new things, it can be uncomfortable, but just do it anyway. It's okay that it feels uncomfortable. Just get involved, be resilient. Ask the question. You're comfortable, just do it again anyway. People appreciate, I think, that openness, that willingness to learn, that interest. And the other thing for me, I've talked a lot about HSBC, is around ally.
Okay.
So while you may not fit into a particular element of diversity and inclusion, you can be an ally and an advocate for others who are. So you can speak out for others, maybe from the BAME community or from the LGBT plus community. You're not necessarily fit into that group yourself. And I think that's really powerful as well, in terms of more people talking and really getting the conversation going.
Yeah, and that's fascinating to sort of hear that sort of allyship piece. That's not something that we've kind of come across yet in our conversations. Is that a way that you can get a lot of our survey responses, and this may come as a surprise or it may not, alluded to the fact that they think that this is a senior management problem. They don't see it as an issue that they should be worried about. The whole compliance function should be worried about. They see this as a very much board senior management kind of responsibility. Now, is that allyship a way that you approach other areas of the business, sort of the lower levels of the business? How do you approach those who aren't senior managers and board members about this kind of stuff in sort of your experience? What's been the most effective way of doing that?
Yeah, I think allyship is one element of that. We've got employee resource groups run by the employees for employees for lots of different areas of diversity and inclusion. And each of those employee resource groups join up on various matters, so they cross and interlink into each other. And that's a good way of opening it up to everybody. So you'll find those employee resource groups, yes, they may have a very senior sponsor, somebody from the board, from the executive committee, but actually the members, you, me, everybody in the business. And that in itself gets everybody involved. And, they're running education sessions, they're running events, it could be a quiz, it just gets put together and, just gets the conversation going. It's a whole mixture of things. Black History Month recently, they've been having film nights, which are virtually, so we've been watching various films. So that's been, again, it's just brought the conversation around a fun thing that we're. So I think there's lots and lots of different elements that you can think about it. Within my team, we've been having cafes, culture cafes. I had one around the Caribbean recently that none of my colleagues were involved in, and sharing the culture, the food around that particular culture. And, it's been great to learn. As I say, just really good fun as well. So not always serious, although it is a serious matter, but, making it fun as well.
Yeah, of course. And it's a big part of what we do here is trying to make subjects which perhaps aren't the world's most exhilarating topics, let's say, trying to make them engaging, trying to make them fun, trying to bring them to life a little bit more than just sending around an email or just sending around a sort of statement from the business. So approaching it in those ways, it's really creative, and it's clearly having a positive effect if you're having sort of interaction from all across the business. How important do you think it is to get different levels of the business involved, and not just have this sit at the top, if you like? How important is that?
It's really crucial to get everybody involved at all levels of the organisation, to really build that conversation out and make sure that everybody's involved. Because, you know, same as diversity of different cultures, you know, diversity of different levels of the organisation can give different perspectives as well. So just really important that everybody's voice is heard, that discussion and that debate.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been fascinating, honestly, to sort of get that insight directly from you, so heavily involved in these kinds of discussions in this professional space, to hear about how you approach it from that kind of educational, fun, don't be scared of this conversation. I think the thing that we've drawn out of this the most is the biggest barrier to starting these kinds of conversations is fear. So if we can find a way to get around that, oh gosh, I'm really scared to get involved in this conversation. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to be penalised if I say something to sort of inadvertently offend someone. So creating that safe space that people feel able to talk and ask questions as well. I think the ability to ask questions if you don't understand is really important. And I've sort of heard that through what you've said as well. So thank you for sort of joining me and talking us through your experiences and your opinion. It's been fascinating.
Not at all. Been here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.